According to my mother, I did my first paid performance at the age of 3 when I got paid sixpence for doing a Punch and Judy show. Because my dad was actually a head teacher, but he was a semi-professional magician and very good ventriloquist. I mean, he could give Ray Allen a run for his money. And he, every Christmas, instead of buying me toys and things, he would buy me professional magical equipment and things. So, and yeah, I can remember on Saturdays, my brother getting up at some ungodly hour and going off to a Curry's electrical store in Hanley in Stoke-on-Trent for the entire day and getting paid £2, whereas I used to go out at the age of 12, 13, 14 and do a children's party on a Saturday afternoon. I didn't drive, so the client had to come and pick me up and take me home again. And I think I used to charge a £5.
Fantastic.
It was like finding money in the street. So and again, because my parents were both also into amateur dramatics, so I mean, I didn't go to drama school, but most of the stuff that I learned from standing in the wings watching my dad perform, standing in the wings watching my mum and dad perform in shows, and also I was born in a village called Biddulph in North Staffordshire, and our local theatre was the Victoria Theatre at Harts Hill in Stoke-on-Trent. No longer there, but it's now been rebuilt as the new Victoria Theatre, and it was only one of two theatres in the company. Sorry, it was one of only two theatres in the country in the round. The other one being the Stephen Joseph in Scarborough, where Alan Ayckbourn wrote and stuff. So my early experience of the theatre was stuff in the round. So going and see something with a traditional proscenium or march was something that sort of happened later on in my childhood. And again, that's something that's always interested me. And one of the great things about Southhill Park, we've got the ability to do both. We can do it in the round. And when I announced to my parents and careers teachers at school that I wanted to be an actor, they did everything that they could to discourage me. And said that if I was really set on a career in the performing arts, I should have something to fall back on. So I did an HCIMA in, sorry, not an HCIMA, an HND in Hotel Catering and Institutional Management. And having done the course, I thought I'd better get some work experience. So I went to work in Switzerland for a little while. And then 12 years later, woke up one morning and said, hang on a minute, this wasn't the plan. So I didn't come to acting professionally till my late 20s, early 30s. Well, I sort of got a bit sidetracked really, because to get my equity card, I used my skills as a magician and what have you. And I very quickly discovered that I could make more money on a Saturday going out and doing a couple of children's birthday parties than I could make for an entire week performing in the theatre. I think that in those days the equity weekly minimum wage was £290. And you know, I've never been one for living in squalid bedsits and what have you. So I did concentrate very much on that side of things, the sort of light entertainment conference work, and actually acting in proper plays was secondary. And I did some work on you know, very minor roles on TV programs like The Bill and a drama called Frankenstein's Baby Would Die in a Rig. But yeah, mostly it was the kids' parties and the magic.
Yeah.
But also being realistic about it, I think, I mean, I've got to play not only here at Southhill Park, but in other places that I've performed. I've probably got to play parts that I would never have played professionally.
A bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So around about the time that I was starting out as an entertainer, and I was getting the odd contract at Southfield Park for that Christmas shows and things like that. And I was married to somebody who was the graduate training manager for a well-known, in those days, now defunct company called ICL. And they wanted a professional actor to come in and do some role play, business simulation. So I went and started doing that. And again, because I'd had this background in the hotel industry, I'd got these management skills and know-how as well as the acting thing. A lot of actors who go into the corporate role play world don't get it, and they go in and if they've been asked to play an angry customer, they are going to be an angry customer come hell or high water. But that's not the point. The idea is you've got to be an angry customer, and if the person you're dealing with handles the situation well, then you need to respond and calm down. So I started doing a lot of that, and then the request would come in, well, actually we need 3 actors for this event or whatever. So again, through my association here, I got together with 4 other people, and we sort of did it on an ad hoc basis for a little while, then realised there was a business opportunity. So we formed a partnership, and all of us had full-time occupations other than role play, and the idea was that the role play would fill in between those commitments, and now those commitments are all gone out the window and we're full-time doing role play, forum theatre, we make videos, all that sort of thing, and we're actually based here at Southfield Park.
I think that's a really fantastic.
So I moved to Bracknell in 1979, and I joined Bracknell Drama Club, and several people at Bracknell Drama Club were associated with Southfield Park, including a guy called Chris Pettit, who worked here. I mean, the Wild Theatre hadn't been built in those days. It was the mansion and the studio theatre, and every summer they did outdoor productions, and I knew people who were in those, so I remember coming to see things on the back lawn. No idea what the productions were, but great fun, and always a little bit sort of what's the expression? Technically unsophisticated, you know, stages made out of bits of old plank and beer crates and whatnot. It was all a bit crude, but great fun. Yeah. And then during that time, several local groups were campaigning to have a proper theatre in Bracknell, and I can remember, as part of Bracknell Drama Club, having a group of Germans over from Leverkusen, which is Bracknell's twin town, and as part of their visit to Bracknell, coming up to Southfield Park and standing where McAllister's bar is, sort of behind us, when it was just an open space, but they'd poured the concrete for the foundation, so standing in what is now McAllister's, looking down and seeing the footprint and the orchestra pit that was full of water and what have you, and even then just sort of thinking, ooh, this is a bit special, because Southfield Park was special anyway, and it was then that I really started to get involved with Southfield Park. I wasn't able to come to the actual opening of the Wild Theatre because I had a proper job in those days, but I very quickly got involved. It was in the days when there was quite a lot of money in the arts, and I guess because the Wild Theatre was newly funded and there was a lot of interest in it, and there was budgets to actually employ a full-time community theatre officer, and in those days it was a guy called Rene Wright, and one of the first things that they put on here was a community production of The Gondoliers, and it was a rock version of Gilbert and Sullivan's Gondoliers. And I always remember that on the opening night, the first, I don't know, 32 bars of the overture were played as is in the original Sullivan score, and then round about bar 32 the electric guitar cut in, and you could hear seats tipping up as people got up and walked out, because that was quite, 1984, it was a bit daring in those days. And actually, thinking about it, I am still really, really good friends with people who I met in that production. Alan Valentine, who I think was about 13, and I now run a roleplay business, corporate roleplay, and one of my co-directors, Pippa Shepherd, again was about 15, and that was the first time I met her, and lifelong friendships were forged in that production. By that time, I'd actually come to Bracknell because it was a new town, and having worked in hotels for many years where I'd lived in, I came to Bracknell because A, my father lived in Bracknell, and B, because it was a new town, if you came to work here, you automatically got council accommodation. So I moved into a 2-bedroomed flat, me and my then wife, and for the first time in many years, actually had my evenings free, because hotels, funny house and things. And I went to Bracknell Library and said drama groups, Bracknell Drama Club, and hence to Southhill Park. So I did quite a lot of community theatre here, and by that time I was also working as I'd packed in the catering, and I'd started working as a professional entertainer, mainly doing kids' parties, but cabaret and trade shows as a magician and what have you. And I can't remember which year now, but Renee Wright, the community theatre officer, left, and this guy came along called Dominic Barber, who was just the most amazing, charismatic man, who just brought all these extraordinary people together. I mean, one of the things that Dominic did, they did a production of Girls of Slender Means, and it's all based on the war and the RAF and what have you. Again, at that time, Bracknell had an RAF staff college, so Dominic got an article in the local paper and contacted them direct and said, we need RAF men, and several people came and were in that show, and finding men for community productions is always a bit difficult, and but again, all these men came along and met Dominic, and there was just something about him that made them go, yeah, go on then. He really knew how to stretch people, and it was never good enough for Dominic to just do what he'd always done. There was always sort of, come on, you do something different, do something else, but he just did it in a way that you just wanted to, just because he was Dominic, and he just had this, I don't know, just by sheer personality, he had this sort of Svengali-like influence, and there was nothing worse. I remember we did a production, I think it was Tom Jones, and it was a promenade production, and when we weren't actually on stage, we were round the tiers and things, looking over and being part of the audience in costume, and we would sing some of the songs from those positions. And there was one song, and I was never too sure of the words, so I had put the words inside my tricorn hat, so I just took my hat off and stood there singing them, and Dominic saw me, and he didn't say anything ever, but the look he gave me, and I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified, and I went home, and that night I learnt those words. There was a lovely chap. We did a production of Chicago. So Dominic decided to do The Fears and Miseries of the Third Reich by Brecht and Chicago. Cabaret. I'll say that again. Dominic decided to do The Fears and Miseries of the Third Reich by Brecht and Cabaret, Kander and Ebb, in tandem, in repertory. So one night of one night of the other, because they complemented each other. And I was cast as Herr Schultz in Cabaret. And we rehearsed for a couple of weeks, and then we turned up one night, and Dominic said, "I'm terribly sorry, but there's been a problem with getting the performing rights license to Cabaret, so we're not doing that anymore. We're now doing Chicago. And Julian, you're no longer playing Herr Schultz, you're playing Billy Flynn. And Irene, you're no longer playing Sally Bowles, you're playing whatever it was, Velma Kelly and whatnot." And again, nobody sort of went, mm-hmm. We all went, yeah, okay, cool, that's fine. So anyway, we did it in the round, and there was this lovely actor called Colin Evans, and he was one of the male chorus. And at the end of every rehearsal, the cry would go up, "Right, everybody can go except Roxy's boys. You need to stay because we need to go over the routine again and whatnot." And there was one night where during a performance, the boys turned and he turned the wrong way and he was facing in the wrong direction. And I can remember him hiding in the dressing rooms. I mean, not getting in a cupboard or anything, but just keeping out of Dominic's way because he was terrified. No, not terrified, that's the wrong word. He was mortified that he had let Dominic down. And I can remember Dominic came into the dressing room and said, "Colin, that was brilliant." He said, "You got it wrong, but you did it with such confidence that the audience thought everybody else was wrong and you were the only one who got it right." And that sort of summed Dominic up. He always found the positive. He always got you to talk about what you were good at rather than saying, "That's rubbish, don't do it again." Mentioned about in those days we had a community theatre officer, but there was also a dance officer here. There was a music officer, who in those days was Ron McAllister, who came on to be chief executive. The place had lots and lots of funding, both from the local authority, Southern Arts Council of Great Britain. So there was money to do that sort of thing. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, I mean, I can remember we did Nicholas Nickleby, the RSC production, 8.5 hours in duration. You had to come twice to see, in the afternoon to see part one and in the evening to see part two. 64 people in the cast playing 200 and something odd characters, but there were performances where there were more people on stage than there were in the audience. But, my understanding was it was paid for. There was no, it would have been nice to have paid it for house. Whereas now, and some would say rightly, we have to do things that pay their way and bums on seats and what have you. So it was nice to have that indulgence because it meant that the choice of productions was arguably slightly more interesting and less safe. But yeah, and because the other thing about Southfield Park, quite apart from the community productions, they didn't do pantomime in those days. I think it was Dominic made the decision that with Guildford and Windsor and Reading and Leatherhead and Woking all offering traditional pantomimes, Southfield Park would offer something different, and they did things like Old King Cole by Ken Campbell, my first ever professional contract, Monty Moonbeam's Magnificent Mission, The Gingerbread Man, the sort of David Wood type children's theatre, polka theatre type productions, and they were enormously popular. We always played to full houses, I seem to recall, but less performances. I mean, now I think this year's pantomime 64 performances, and in those days we'd probably do about 24. And yeah, people would come because it's like, particularly schools audiences, because it was something different, and that was the thing about Southall Park. It did the productions that other local groups didn't do. So Panto, Southall Park decided to go down the route of going for traditional pantomime and whatnot. And again, it was written in-house and things like that. And I always thought it was done sort of a little bit sort of half-heartedly and what have you. And the budgets were never very good. And no, because I was in some of them. But then I got asked to direct Jack and the Beanstalk. And I did 4 consecutive years. And again, you know, that question about, you know, what would you like people to say about you? What I really, really tried to do, and I think with some success, was to say, look, come on, let's introduce a little bit of the variety element. Oh, you know, professional magician. So I tried every year to put in some illusions and things like that. And yeah, one of the things I'm proudest of is that the 4 years I did, not only did the audience numbers go up, but every year we exceeded the budgeted profit on the show. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that since I relinquished and Adam Stafford, who's my successor, has taken over, that trend has continued. And I think that's absolutely terrific. And I think now the biggest step forward with the whole thing is that we're not just recycling those, which were great when they were first written, but it was starting to get a bit tired and whatnot. And you know how wonderful that last year they commissioned a new writer, and it got nominated for an award, for God's sake. And yeah, I think that was long overdue. But something else that again started during my time as director, the adult performances, where it's like, do you know what? Anything goes. And they're not X-rated or anything like that. But I'm of a generation whereby you would go and see a pantomime, and I remember seeing Morecambe and Wise in Sleeping Beauty at the Manchester Opera House many years ago, and they would say things that my parents would laugh at, and I'd go, "Why was that funny?" And my parents would say, "No, don't worry about it." But of course, we live in a world now where if kids don't get the joke, they can go home and Google it. And political correctness, which is a good thing in some ways, but in other ways, and you. So I think one of the things that's sort of missing from pantomime and things like it now is that whole sort of working the audience on different levels, and now you have to be much more careful about what you say and do, which in some ways is a good thing, but it can be quite inhibiting and stifling. Yeah. One of the joys about South Hill Park, the Wild, is that the space is infinitely adaptable, and we have produced operas here. There was a production that I was involved with, again in the 80s, The Tragedy of Carmen, and it was the Bizet opera, but with all the orchestra sort of stripped away, and the cast. So there was 6 performers, 4 of them professional opera singers, and then 2 others, and of which I was one. I played Lilius Pasture, the innkeeper, and again, back to Dominic, I remember him coming up to me during a production saying, "Oh, we're doing this production of Carmen and whatnot, and we need somebody to play Lily's Pasture. there's not much money in it, but would you be interested? And it's like, well, I'll do it. Um, and I forget the sum now. I think 50 quid was mentioned, and it's like, yeah, go on, 50 quid. Um, and I remember rehearsing in the recital room one Monday morning, and it was a beautiful summer's day. The windows were open. They were mowing the lawn, and this opera singer, what was her name? I think it'd been a lady called Jackie Everell, singing the bit in Lily's Pasture's Tavern, and she's singing to me, and I'm sitting there, and all the little hairs on the back of my neck going up, thinking, I'm getting paid to have this woman sing to me. Or not. Anyway, we performed it here, I think 4 performances, and we took it down to the new Theatre Royal in Portsmouth and whatever, and it turned out the money was per performance. I thought it was 50 quid the lot, but it was per performance, so it was much better than I was expecting. So yeah, we did, and there was another couple of things that they'd Incident at Owl Creek, which was another newly commissioned opera. So they did try to sort of get on that circuit, but it didn't sort of quite work out. Highlights. We did a production, it was 1987, The Adventures of Mr. Toad, based on Winnie the Willows, and it's subsequently been revived 4 times, or revived 3 times, we've done it 4 times. And I played Mr. Toad in that 1987 and 1993, and then in I think 2001 we did it and I was Badger, and then they did it again and I said no, I'm not doing it a 4th time. And again, that was just a wonderful experience, because it was, I think, one of the first things that we'd done in the round, and it just all just came together. Oh yeah, because that was the show. Dominic sadly had an accident. He'd fallen off a ladder whilst rigging some stuff at Wokingham Theatre, and he'd smashed his jaw and his wrist and whatnot, and he had to pull out the production. So the choreographer took over the production, and it was one of those shows where on opening night, I think we'd only ever run the show once, but it just happened. It just all came along through sheer bravado and not wanting to let Dominic down, and it was fabulous. And they made a recording of that show, and apparently when people apply or inquire about performing at other theatres, they still use the soundtrack from that original production as a marketing tool, which is rather nice. Yeah, somebody did abseil off the proscenium arch during a production of Barnum, and I think broke their shoulder, and it was the guy playing the ringmaster, so Paul Taylor, who was the director, had to go on and play the part for the entire run. And another classic one, Nicholas Nickleby, somebody had lent us their finest bone china, Royal Dalton, I think, from memory. And there's a scene with the Mantellinis where they're having breakfast, and one of the stage crew walked on and tripped and smashed the entire lot. And I just remember the actor, Chris somebody or other, just sort of gathering everything together and managing to eat his breakfast out of the shattered remains. I think he managed to find the boiled egg. And so yeah, never ever lend props to theatres. I mean, I think that the arts in this country has been seriously neglected and underfunded for donkey's years, and there's all this emphasis put on the sciences and what have you. Part of my role as my role play business is dealing with people who, yeah, they can do you a spreadsheet like nobody's business, but say good morning to them and they're lost for an answer. The arts, and not just the performing arts, music and all the other stuff that does here, it's character building and it's social skills, and it's um, uh, uh, was it Winston Churchill who in the war said something about if there's no arts in the country, then what's the bloody point in fighting the war in the first place? You know, it's the lifeblood of community, and what's great about Southhill Park is that even though there's not a community theatre and there's not a community theatre officer anymore, there's not a dance officer, there's not a music officer, things like that. These things are still going on. They've just taken on a life of their own. And I was here last night to see a homegrown, locally written production of a just fantastic play about Judy Garland, and you just sort of think, yeah, this is what this place is about. It's not just bums on seats. It's actually it's also being a facility for people to come and try things out um, and yeah, and I guess one of the things I'd like to see perhaps going forward is more commissioning of new work and giving more people a chance to tell stories.
Mm. So, how would you like to be remembered? How can you summarise your time here at Southall Park, and what do you think that you'd like to be remembered for?
Oh gosh. Well, ultimately, what would be really nice is if people found themselves in a rehearsal room and were saying to themselves, what would Julian do? Just in the same way that I think that about Dominic and other people that I've worked with here as well. Just that passing it on,